Hi, my name is Erin Kelly, and this is my presentation for our class Studies in Interpersonal Communications 508. Next slide. So I realized that in order to find my own personal communication style, it's important to define my overarching goal. And the best definition that I could come up with was found in the Bible in Ephesians. This gives the perfect definition of how I want to communicate with others and how important communication really can be, and how God views communication. And this verse is my overarching goal, what I want to strive to be as a communicator. Next slide. So after I defined my overarching goal as a communicator, I realized that it's important to take a closer look at my own communication. And this coincides with what Vance and Leonard said in their article that I read. And they said that we all need to evaluate our intents and behaviors to determine whether we are also guilty of making life difficult for our families, our friends, our coworkers, anybody else. And this is really what I think is important. That's why I really enjoy doing this project, because it's helping me determine to see if I'm making communication more difficult for others, which is something I really do not want to be doing. Next slide. So after I defined my overarching goal, I took a closer look at my history of communication and how my history has maybe affected my own personal communication style. I found 3 different points. The first one is that my extended family on my mother's side definitely has a history of more of a debating style of communicating. And this is something that my parents fortunately have helped work through in our family to kind of subside that and get more of a dialogue style of communicating. And that's learning from my family and their style of communicating has really helped me define my own communication. Also, looking at my personality type has helped a lot as well. For the next slide, I have found that I am an SC personality type. And I've classified some of the things that are very true in my own personal life and are affecting the way that I communicate with others. I found that SCs tend to think people expect you to always be right. They also expect more out of others, which can lead to a sense of depression and moodiness in them just because their expectations usually aren't met. They also prefer one-on-one relationships rather than being involved in a whole group. And they work very hard to meet expectations, and they focus more on fixing problems than actually on building relationships. And lastly, they tend to be more reserved. And I found that all of these points are very true in my own life. They're also points that I want to strive to change in order to better my interpersonal communication with others. I found that I need to learn to be more open with people, to lighten up a little more, try and focus more on the person rather than the problem, stop trying to just fix a situation, but focus more on the actual people that are involved in the situation. Next slide. And now, in a journey, everyone's going to come up with barriers. And I've defined some of the barriers that I have come across when evaluating my communication style. And the 4 barriers that I found that are the largest for me is being a half-hearted listener, having difficulty with being trusting and open with others, turning dialogue into more of a debate, and then also what I call the shooting star syndrome. The next slide. And now, lots of people have trouble listening. And as you can see from this slide, many people really aren't listening when others are talking to them. It's a very common occurrence. Next slide. So, are we really listening? Am I really listening when other people are talking to me? Throughout this course, I've realized that lots of times I'm not listening, and that's something I really want to change. And as Peterson says, I came to believe that most people think they listen, but they really don't hear each other. I could be sitting there right next to somebody. They could be talking to me and I could not hear a word they've said, which I've found really does happen a lot with me. And then Burley Allen states that when we think about listening, we tend to assume it's basically the same as hearing. This is a dangerous misconception because it leads us to believe effective listening is instinctive. Throughout this course, I've realized that effective listening is not instinctive. It's something that we really have to work on, and it's something that we have to make a conscious decision to do. Next slide. In the article by James Floyd, he talks about what he defines as dialogical listening, and he gives certain requirements that he thinks are important for a dialogical listener. And these requirements are ones that I want to be able to apply to my own life and my listening skills, because I know that that'll help me become a better listener, and which in turn will lead me to be a better communicator. Next slide. Floyd also states that to listen without pretense, attempting to understand the other person's views and situation, accepting others as having inherent worth, being mentally and emotionally present, not just physically, listening without feeling of superiority or inferiority, all contribute to a supportive communication climate. And this is something that I definitely want to strive for, because I want to be able to build that supportive communication climate where other people will feel comfortable coming to me, telling me about whatever is on their heart, whatever's on their mind, and know that I will be there ready to listen to them in a supportive way, where I won't just physically be sitting there, but actually involved with them, listening to them on an empathetic level. Next slide. And the Bible states in James 1:19, "Understand this, my dear brothers, let every person be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger." This gives such a great example of just how important listening it is. The communication process, lots of times people just think of it as speaking, but in this verse you can see that listening is more important than even talking to somebody. And that's why I want to definitely break down the listening barrier that I have in my own communication process. And the next slide. I definitely have a struggle with being trusting of others and being open with others. Stewart says, to be open with another person, you must be aware of who you are, accept yourself, and take the risk of trusting the other person to be accepting of you. I have a problem with being open with others just because I think I really struggle with the B portion of this quote, being accepting of myself, and then taking the risk of trusting that others will be accepting of me as well. It's something that I always feel like I have to change myself or somehow do something better, and it goes back to my SD personality type where my expectations are very high. But as Proverbs reminds us, the heartfelt counsel of a friend is a sweet perfume and incense. It's good to have close friendships with others, and breaking down the barriers of my not trusting others very much and not being open is something that I definitely am going to work on, am working on, and will continue to work on, because I know it'll make me a better communicator. And for the next slide, the dialogue versus debate. As I mentioned earlier, my family sort of has a history of really liking the debate type of communicating, where it gets a little fierce and there's a lot of arguing going on, and we feel like we have won the communication argument. In debate, there's an unhealthy urge to want to win a communication or when you're communicating with others. And this is something that doesn't make the other person feel well at all. And then assuming that there's a right answer and you have it is something that I also struggle with, and is something that I want to change. And the next slide is the shooting star syndrome. It's this is actually, the shooting star syndrome is something that I struggle with, just because it's, again, goes back to expectations and trying to live up to what you think other people are expecting from you. And I have to start to realize that it's God's expectations that I need to live up to, and not other humans or the only expectations that I put on myself. The next slide is steps towards solutions. You have to And this is trying to reduce the noise pollution that can be internal and external. And some ways that I found would be important to be able to reduce this noise pollution is to make sure you're aware of certain things. And some things that I want to be aware of in my own communication process is trigger words that might make me stop listening to what the person's saying and just focus on that one word. Recognizing thuds, like Peterson says in his book, where something just hits you wrong and then you just completely stop communicating. Any distractions that might be going on, this might be just people talking in the other room, playing, whatever. And then any insecurities that could stop you from being open with another person. And the next slide is my plan of action in order to improve my communication style. The first thing is that I have to just be trusting in the Lord, knowing that He will be able to bring about a change in my communication style and be able to improve it if I give it over to Him. And then I'm also going to try and follow Peterson's 4 goals to counter the flat brain syndrome, as well as utilizing my TLC card so that when I'm listening, I really know that I'm listening and engage in that intently. And then I want to change from a level 2 listener, which is what I am right now, up to a level 1 listener. And then finally, I want to be able to do all this in a way that would be pleasing to God. And I have to remember that He's the one who created me. And as it says in Psalms 139:14, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. He's made me, and He's made me in His image, and I have to remember that and stop trying to reach for those high expectations that I tend to set for myself, which really breaks down my communication process. And the next slide. Communicating is a full array of different things, from listening, being open, just dialogue, debate, and I know that through this course I've gained a better understanding of the communication process, and I know that it's going to help me in my own interpersonal communication. And the next slide. And as I've stated sort of throughout the whole presentation, I hope that my communication will be able to be better, because then I will be able to serve God better, and I'll be able to, as Psalm 145 verse 5 says, speak of the glorious honor of His majesty and of His wonderful works. Thank you so much.